Hey, Caroline. Welcome to Creative Inspired Happy.
Hi, it's so good to see you again. I've been missing you since we first hung out.
I know it's been a while, but congratulations. Today is the day that your cookbook is out. I'm so excited for you because this
Woo!
has been a long time coming.
It has. Thank you. Yes, as you know, the writing process and then the lead up and then the marketing and then everything, it feels very exciting for it finally to be here and be out in the world and be in everyone's hands, and it's all very exciting.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And you wrote there's a recipe from your cookbook that was in my book club kit. So that was such a
Yes.
fun collaboration.
Yes, the lentil bruschetta. If you are a 1 year ago in Spain fan, you can go down a tapas journey with the lentil bruschetta from my book.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Okay, so I definitely want to talk about your cookbook, but first, what I'd like to do on this show is take everyone back to the beginning when you started, when you were not Caroline Chambers yet. And you now have a huge Substack newsletter, you have a podcast, you have incredible socials, and then this is your second cookbook. But
Mhm.
let's start at the beginning. How did you get started? And yeah, tell me how you built all of that.
Okay, so I have always loved food and cooking for people. And even when I was in college, I knew I wanted to make a career out of food. But this is sort of blogging, like food blogging is sort of a thing, and I didn't feel like that was for me. Instagram doesn't really exist yet. I knew I didn't want to work in restaurants, and so I couldn't figure out how to work in the food space but not be working in a restaurant. And so I went into advertising after school. I worked in advertising for a few years, and during that I got to work on a lot of food and bev clients. So I worked on Don Julio Tequila was my biggest account. I was 22, going to nightclubs to film Don Julio Tequila content on my shitty BlackBerry and tweet it these low res pictures. So that was my first sort of entrance into the food media space. And I married young. I married my college boyfriend who was become going into the Navy, and he was deploying to Afghanistan. So we got married really young, and I moved out to San Diego to be with him. And when I moved out there, that's when the food career began, because he was like, "You love food. You want to work in food. You hate advertising. Figure out how to work in food." And still, the food media space wasn't huge yet. And so I started a catering company, very willy nilly. I had no idea what I was doing, totally flying by the seat of my pants, faking it till I made it. And I grew it. I grew it from doing really small birthday parties and little dinner parties at first to doing 300-person weddings by the end of it. And I went from there. We moved because of George's career again up to Northern California. I worked in San Francisco at a test kitchen. And this is where I credit getting really good at writing recipes. So there's a wrong way and there's a right way and a wrong way to write a recipe. Um, they're supposed ingredients need to be listed in the order they're used. They need to be listed volumetrically, smallest to largest in that order that they're used. There's a lot of things that are right and wrong about how to write a recipe, and this is where I got really technically good at writing recipes. I also learned it was a strategy and test kitchen, so we would do tons of research, what's projected to be the really cool ingredient in 2025. Why do we think that? Because we were creating menus for restaurants that had to start thinking about their logistics and planning a year and a half in advance to get acai to Iowa. So I got really good at predicting food trends and thinking about the way that people eat and why they like to eat that way. And it was a really tough workplace, but it was a really great experience. It was my boot camp. I didn't go to culinary school. This was my culinary boot camp. So from there, I started freelance recipe developing, got my first cookbook deal, and that has all kind of led me to where I am now.
So how did you decide then to take your recipe creation, was the cookbook before your Substack? And then how did you build it out then once Instagram became a thing because you're also huge there?
Yes. Okay. So I got my first cookbook deal shortly after leaving the test kitchen. My first cookbook's called Just Married, and Chronicle in San Francisco wanted basically a cookbook for newlyweds. So getting a cookbook deal is hard. Like you have to like really have a big audience and all these things. I didn't have a big audience. Like I said, I like wasn't trying to food blog. I wasn't big on Instagram yet, but I was just a really good recipe developer. And so my agent was like, would you want to write a proposal for this? They're looking for a newlywed person to write this cookbook called Just Married. Like it was like they needed to slot in a writer to a book they already wanted. And so I was like, yeah, of course I would want to write a cookbook. So I, really didn't have a big Instagram audience, anything. And I got a cookbook deal, which is really kind of impossible by today's standards. So I got that deal in 2015. It came out in 2017. 2019, I had this idea. I just had my first son, and I had this idea for another cookbook called What to Cook When You Don't Feel Like Cooking. Because suddenly, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like cooking. I was exhausted. The baby had been up all night. Like, I could barely hang on, and I still had to feed myself and my family. And so I came up with this concept called What to Cook When You Don't Feel Like Cooking. I pitched it everywhere and nobody took it because I didn't have an Instagram following. I didn't have a platform. I didn't have people who would buy it. And Just Married like had a built-in buyer. Like people need a gift to give to newlyweds, right? But What to Cook really needed to rely on the author, me, to sell it. So at first I was pissed and I like stewed in it and was like, like, what the hell? Like, I'm a really good recipe writer. Like, why is nobody giving me a cookbook deal? And then I decided to get to action, and COVID was my turning point. I was a freelance recipe developer at the time. All of my clients went away. They were like, we don't know how to market food in a global pandemic. Like, we can't, we're going to cancel that project for now. So I had no work. And I had a 1-year-old, and I was pregnant with my second son. And I was like, all right, this is my moment to like really build my own brand, like go for it. And I just started cranking Instagram recipes, like constant content, stories all the time. And it turns out that if you are just really consistent in your offering and like show people who you are, you can grow your following still. Like I was like, oh, the Instagram days are over. Like, no one can grow anymore. It's impossible. Growth is impossible. The algorithm's too hard. And like, no, if you are really consistent and really show up, like you can work it. So I did that for about 9 months, just was like really consistent. And then my agent came back and was like, you have enough followers now. I think we could re-pitch this book. And I was like, I have actually a different idea for now. And that was when I launched the Substack. So I launched the same exact concept as the proposal I had put together, What to Cook When You Don't Feel Like Cooking. I launched it as a paid newsletter in December of 2020. And at this point, I probably had like 15,000 Instagram followers or something like that. And I launched as a paid newsletter, and I had just been showing up so consistently and with consistently good recipes that were easy and fast and had tons of hacks and recipe substitutions and all the things that I was able to really quickly grow that Substack audience. And concurrently, I was still cranking on Instagram. And so I was continuing to grow my Instagram audience. And as I continued to grow Instagram, I would convert Instagram followers to Substack. So that was how it all kind of started. And then you asked about the cookbook. And so 2 years later, I had really grown the Substack to be quite popular and have a lot of readers. And an editor, a very astute editor, was following the progress of What to Cook. And she got in touch with my agent and was like, I don't need a proposal. Here's how much I can offer her. Like, I want her book. When she's ready, I want to write the book. And I was like, I don't have to write a proposal. I don't have to like pitch it around to people. That's a great number. Done.
That's amazing. And I love that it was persistence and patience that got you there, and that actually you didn't
Yes.
rush it. When your agent came back after the big Instagram following, you didn't say, yeah, let's do it now. And that really paid off. So I really admire that confidence, that
Yeah.
bravery. I think I read somewhere that you were talking about converting your Instagram followers to bring them over to Substack, and that back
Mhm.
then you didn't have the link yet in your stories. And so you were
Yes.
manually asking people to DM you, and then you would take their email address and put them into
Yes.
your subscriber list, which is incredible.
The initial building of What to Cook, the Substack, was just like pure freaking hustle. Like frankly, it wasn't very healthy. I was just like not sleeping. I was spending so much time on it. I was absolutely cranking to show people that it was worth it and that it was a really valuable tool that would make their cooking lives easier and thus their lives easier. So yes, go back with me to 2020, if you will. And if you were like had an Instagram presence at all, you'll recall that you had to have 10,000 followers to have a swipe up link. So nowadays anybody can have like a link sticker. But back then they had this weird rule that like you had to have 20,000 followers to have a swipe up. And so to swipe up, you could have gone straight to the What to Cook page and entered your own email. But since I didn't have that, yeah, like you just said, I would do a question box, which anybody could do. I'd be like, put your email here and to subscribe to What to Cook. And they didn't know what I was doing, but I was looking at that list and manually entering every single email address.
That's incredible. The hustle is impressive. I can see why you were probably burnt out, but
Yes. Yes. After I had my second son, I was really like in the throes of What to Cook becoming really popular. And when you work for yourself, taking maternity leave is hard, but I like forced myself to take 4 weeks off, and I was like, whoa, I was tired. Like
yeah, yeah.
it's crazy when having your second kid is like, it felt like a vacation because I like really forced myself to take a break from work.
Okay, so I want to talk about your newsletter a little bit because you had started out by saying that you were not interested in blogging. And the newsletter then means that you have to write. And I feel like so back in the day, cookbooks were basically just compilations of recipes. But now cookbooks are these gorgeous pieces of art with so much food photography, but also it requires a lot of voice from the chef, the cook themselves. You need to be telling little stories about either the food, how
Yes.
you came up with the recipe, or maybe even from your life. So, how did you get yourself around to, instead of just writing recipes freelance for people, to then adding in your stories? And how did you find your writing voice?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think Substack newsletters really are kind of like the old school blogging. It's just that it goes directly to it's very much like a blog. And so I kind of wound up in the blogging space, but it's called a newsletter. Um, yeah, I really I'm a very like chatty person. Like I could talk to a brick wall. And when I first started the newsletter, I thought that it needed to be really like serious. Like I thought it needed to be all about the food. People don't want to hear about me. People don't want to hear about my experience. They just want to hear about the food. And I kind of kept it that way. And I feel like What to Cook became what it is and became the community that it is when I started really sharing like personal stories and like this noodle dish is inspired by this trip to Japan that I took with my two best friends. It was so absurd. Here's this crazy thing that happened to us. That's when that's when the newsletter really started to grow a community because it's really hard to grow a community, like to grow followers, to convert followers from followers to a community is a hard thing. But once you start to bring them in to your own story and also like ask to hear their story, like I'd be like, tell me in the comments, like, has anybody ever been to Japan? Like what was the coolest ramen you had? Whatever it is, going from that from thinking it was really serious and all about the food to really making it about me too was when it went really kind of started to go well. um yeah, it is funny though that now I have to do so much food writing. Like you said, the cookbooks are so like you have to really have a story for 100 recipes. You're like, I can't talk anymore. I don't know, I don't have anything else to say.
So, how do you draw that line between where your personal life is and your private? I know that, and I also want to talk about balancing motherhood with a creative career because you are juggling 3 kids,
Hmm.
and I know that they are part of your Instagram, part of your Substack sometimes.
Yeah.
But also, like, it's hard to juggle a schedule. Like, when do you test
Yes.
your recipes? When do you have time to write, especially during the summer when the kids are not in school?
Yes. I think to answer the first part of your question, which was how do you kind of separate like personal versus work stuff, like when I'm so online, I think people always wonder this. They're like, do you feel burned out, like constantly sharing and sharing? And I think what people don't realize is like, if I share 10 story slides in a day, like that's like max 5 minutes of my life. And so you can really live your life offline and not feel like you're constantly sharing. And if I have a day where I'm burnt out from Instagramming, like I need a break, I just take a break and like nope, guess what? The world goes on. So that's that part of the answer. And then how do I juggle it is with a ton of help and with less sleep than I should have. I have 3 sons. They're 5, 3, and 1. And I have to say, during the school year, I've got it pretty dialed now. Like the 5 and the 3-year-old are in, well, Mattis is going into kindergarten, Callum's, and they were in preschool, but Mattis is going into kindergarten in like 2 weeks. So they're in school. I have a babysitter slash nanny for the baby. So like I really have that pretty figured out. I think learning the difference between mom guilt and like feeling jealous was a really important distinction for me. People always talk about, oh, mom guilt, mom guilt. I have mom guilt. So I, left work early. I have mom guilt. So I took them to the park on a Wednesday, even when I had so much work. It's not guilt for me. Like, I know that my job is important and I have to work for our family. Like, it's not guilt. I think guilt is like you've done something wrong and you feel bad about it. I'm not doing anything wrong by hustling and working for my family, but I am jealous. Like, my sitter will send me a picture from this park that I really wanted to go to with the kids, and they're having a blast, and I'm jealous. My mom will come to help us out while my husband's out of town or something, and she'll take them to the aquarium, and she sends a picture of them all like having a blast, and I'm jealous. I'm really jealous of that. So there's a big difference there, and understanding that difference has been so helpful, because guilt is a really ugly emotion, and jealousy is one. Oh, I'm sorry, I have such a scratchy voice today. But jealousy is really ugly too, but I can deal with that a lot more easily. I can be like, okay, I name it jealousy, and I'm like, okay, well, I can fix that. Like, I can fix that jealousy by making time this weekend to take them to that same park. I can fix that jealousy by, I don't know, taking them to the aquarium next weekend. So it's hard. It's really hard. Sometimes I look at my single friends who also have Substacks and are writing cookbooks. I was with a friend this past weekend in New York, and he kind of has the same stuff as I do. We even have the same manager. And he was like, you're so impressive. Like, I don't understand how you do all this. Like, I'm so busy and I don't have any kids. And I was like, oh yeah, like, this is a cool, impressive thing that I'm doing. Like, this is hard. Like, thanks. So you
Yeah.
gotta sometimes like recognize, like, it is as hard as you think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate that perspective. And I've never actually heard anyone talk about it before from that perspective as well. It's usually kind of the feeling of like, oh, I can't do my work because I need to do all these things. On the fiction side, a lot of writers, they don't find the time to sit
Yeah.
down and do their writing because it's very easy, especially as a mom, to let life, your kids, everything else just kind of intervene and take priority.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
usually I hear this conversation in terms of like, okay, well, how do you make that space for it? But I really love the point of view that you just offered.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think it's so important that people know that I have so much help. Like, that's how I get it done. People are
Mhm.
like other moms who want to have creative projects, want to be authors, want to have Substacks, are like, I just don't understand like how you get it done. Like, I never have any free time. And I'm like, because I'm prioritizing getting help and having sitters, and maybe my mom will come out, whatever it is. Like, I have to have so much help to produce the amount of content that I am right now. And sometimes that feels really good, and I feel really proud of my career, and like, everything's flowing and I don't feel like I'm missing my kids. Like, I've got the perfect balance. And then sometimes summer's hard, because like summer you think of as like this really fun time to like do all this fun stuff, and as a working mom, it's like, whoa, I thought that I was going to be going to take my kids to the water park and to the aquarium and to the park and to hang out with friends at the pool. And like, I'm stuck in this office work. And so summer's really hard as a working mom,
Yeah.
any mom, as any parent. It's really hard. Um, but it's really hard to try to balance it all and feel good about everything.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. My daughter's a
Yeah.
teenager now, so it's a little bit different. She's a little bit more
Yeah.
independent, but I
Yeah.
remember those years when she was young, and it's a struggle, but
It's a
I think
struggle.
you're an amazing role model, and so I
Thank
appreciate you
you.
being so open and sharing. Do you have a professional team as well helping you out?
I do. Yeah, that when I first launched What to Cook, the newsletter, I definitely did not. But as it began to grow and my Instagram began to grow, my two main revenue streams are now the newsletter and then brand partnerships. So I have an editor who helps me with What to Cook. When What to Cook grew to about 1,000 maybe paid subscribers, I was like, sending it out was like the most nerve-wracking thing because I was like, okay, these people are paying for like, oh, the most perfect recipe ever. If there's a typo in there, like, I'm no longer trustworthy. I'm no longer a trusted resource. Why would they pay me? So I like every newsletter I sent out, I would spend like an hour rereading line by line. And then like I would be like, okay, it's ready, schedule it. And then I would like have a panic attack at 6 a.m. right before it went out and like get up and like re-edit it. So I finally, after only a couple months of having the newsletter, I hired an editor, Molly Ramsey, who is in Charleston, and she's been with me since like month 3 of the newsletter. She's actually, oh, I know she's had maternity leave before, but I don't know what. Oh no, we had both just had our second sons. So she is now having her third son, and so she's going on maternity leave. Yeah, she's on it right now, and it's nerve wracking. But we have a replacement. So I have her. I have a probably 30-hour a week assistant who I really like to call my right hand woman because she does everything for me. She's in my email signing contracts. She's doing like all of the things for me. And I have a manager named Adam who helps me with all my brand partnerships, but he really helps me run my entire business. Like he does a lot more than just brand partnerships. He's on every single marketing call about the book. We're trying to figure out what do the next 5 years look like for me? Do I want to write more books? Do I want to write a book about something other than food? Like what does that look like? He's my guy for that, and he's incredible. He's in LA.
And do you have a manager and an agent? Because I know in the cookbook space, sometimes people have both, whereas in the literary space, I only have an agent. I don't have a manager.
Yeah. Yes. I also have a literary agent. I don't have a talent agent right now. And I feel like that's okay. And if I did, it would just be a talent agent. You then have 15% more of everything you make going out the door. So at some point I will want a talent agent because I want to do TV and other types of work, but not right now. Right now I'm focusing on getting this book out the door and that. But yes, I have a fabulous literary agent, Sarah Smith at David Black. So yes, you're right. She is also a part of my team. And then I have a
Fantastic.
food photographer also who helps me a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about the making of a cookbook. But one thing I wanted to point
Mm.
out was I think that when we talk about having help, a lot of people will think that, oh, you have to already be very successful. You have to be making gobs of money to have help. And I think actually part of it is at some point you have to decide in order to level up, I'm going to have to give up some of my earnings. This is an investment in a
Yes.
business, right?
Yes.
Think about it as any kind of business. If you had your own company, you would be doing that. You'd be starting to hire employees. And like, these are maybe contractors, but you have to decide, okay, all of this money from my advance is not all mine, but I need it in
Yes.
order to invest in my career in the long term.
Yes. I think that childcare is the ultimate example of you got to spend money to make money. I built this business during the pandemic. Like I built the foundation of this business during the pandemic when there was no possibility for childcare. And I was like a shell of a human. I was sleeping like 4 hours a night to be able to produce the amount of content and, really crank and do what I was doing. And that it doesn't work. That's not sustainable. As soon as childcare was an availability again, I definitely like faltered. I was like, oh, but if I'm making $1,000 a newsletter, whatever it was at that time, $500 a newsletter, like if I get a sitter for 4 hours, like, I'm only making 400 for that or whatever. And it's hard and you really struggle with it. And I used to really do that. I'd be like, okay, if I have a sitter, I, have to produce this much content in order to make it worth it or whatever. If I have a sitter, I can't do Instagram content during that time because I don't make money for, free Instagram content. I have to do the newsletter or I have to do a brand partnership during that. And I would be like one for oneing it. Like, okay, I got a $25 sitter. that deal made $3,000. Okay, it was worth it. And now and that's fine. Like if that's what you need to do to justify it at the beginning, that's fine. But yeah, you can't produce the level of work that you need to level up, as you said, if you're trying to juggle it all. You gotta let yourself have help.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I
Yeah.
want to talk about the making of a cookbook. What is the
Yes.
behind the scenes process like? Because obviously I write fiction, so I have no idea.
Yeah. Okay. So the first step is probably the same as yours. Actually, I don't think this is true. Don't you guys fully write the book and then try to
Yes.
sell it?
Well, for
Yes.
the most
Okay.
part, when you get to a certain part of your
Yeah.
career, you don't have to. So I can sell things on proposal now with some sample
Okay.
chapters and an outline. But at the beginning, absolutely, the first few books, you have to write the entire book. And it has to be
Okay.
like 95% there. It has to be that perfect.
Okay. Okay. So yes, no, it is not the same. So with a cookbook, you write a proposal. Typically, with this one, as I told you, I didn't have to because my Substack sort of was my proposal. But you write a proposal, it's like 50 pages long. It's in depth. You're talking about, you even are down to like, who are my friends who will promote this book? Because they need to know that like you've got the people to promote it. So it's, who do I know that to promote it? What's my past work? And then really a deep dive into what the book looks like. Same thing, sample chapters, um, like full every single recipe, kind of at least loosely laid out. What do you want the chapters to look like? Who's the target audience for this? All of that. And it's a really long, lengthy process. I've written many proposals in my lifetime, and they take me like weeks and weeks to do them. So it starts with the proposal. Then hopefully you have an agent. I honestly don't know if you can sell a cookbook without an agent in today's market. I'm sure you can to some publishers, but most publishers will only talk to agents, not directly to you. So then your agent is taking that around to different houses, the different publishing houses, and trying to sell it. So sometimes there's a bidding war. Sometimes one person just gives you the best offer. And so you've got your deal, and then the really hard part which is usually these publishing houses want you to turn these books around really fast. They want like 6 to 9 months and give us the whole book. And so when you break that down to how many recipes you're having to create in how many days, like it's like 2 recipes a day often. And so then you have the rest of your life still happening, your children and your newsletter and your brand partnerships, but then you're adding on top of that you have to develop 2 recipes a day. So that was my life from January 2023 until June of 2023. And it's hard. I think a lot of writers, and I used to ghostwrite cookbooks like for celebrities or for authors who just needed help. I used to get in there and like outright half their book or however many recipes. And I get it now why people have ghostwriters. Like the rest of your life is still happening, but you've got to keep going. So I very much hunkered down and got that done. And then you also have to write all the head notes. What we were talking about earlier is like cookbooks are there's so much storytelling and beautiful words in there that aren't just the food. And I always do a really dumb thing and wait until the end. So I get all the recipes done and then I write the head notes, and you're sitting there trying to think of like another story about like a salad. And you're like, I can't, I don't know. I just made it. I just was in my kitchen and I made it up. And you're like, my mom's great aunt loved this salad. You're like, what do I say about this one? So that is the hardest part for me, the head notes. And my editor, I'll never forget. She is a fabulous editor. She has a very stern pen, and I'll never forget this one note on one of my head notes. It was like the whole thing. So she sent, basically you send off your manuscript and they send it back, right? And it's covered in notes. And the whole thing was highlighted. The whole head note was highlighted, and her note was just Z Z Z Z Z Z Z. I am so bored in all caps. I was like, oh, F. Okay, you're right. That story was dumb. So that part's really hard. So you go back and forth on notes a couple times. This is all your editor has like an entire schedule of when everything has to be done. So they're like, we need it by this point. And then she's getting you edits by a certain point. And then maybe we went back and forth 3 times. And then concurrently with edits, you are shooting the recipes. So that's kind of a wild part, is she'll still be editing a recipe, but you're shooting it. So she's not going to like take out cilantro or something and like ruin the photo, but she's definitely still kind of editing and judging those recipes as you're shooting them. So you choose a food photographer. You have to hire a food photographer, a food stylist, assistant food stylist, prop stylist, and those all come out of your advance. Like you're paying for that.
Oh, really?
And yeah, with Just Married, it was different. I got a lower advance, and because they wanted to control that process, they wanted to hire the photographer, everybody. So they paid for it. But with typically, you're getting an advance that's large enough that you are paying for all those people. Yeah. So that hurts. And you're like, I want the best food photographer, but I also don't want to pay them $100,000. And food photography is really expensive because you're shooting so many recipes. And I am a big proponent of having a photo of every single recipe. And so it's expensive. So when you look at those cookbooks and you're like, oh, you're flipping through and you're like looking for the pictures, like I feel like this is a universal experience. Like we want cookbooks with a photo of every single recipe, but it's hella expensive. And so they are more attractive though. So my cookbooks have a photo of every recipe. Just Married did not, but my cookbooks that I'll produce by myself do. So a photo of every single one. That takes 2.5 weeks to shoot 100 to 120 recipes.
And
So
are you
that's a long
cooking?
process.
You're cooking
No.
every no, okay. So they've got your recipe, so they're doing it in like a studio? Like
Yeah, you're in a studio. Sometimes they're renting a studio. A lot of food photographers have their own studio. Eva Kalenko up in Marin or in Sonoma County was my food photographer. She has a gorgeous kitchen, food photography studio. So we did everything there. Um, so we're doing everything there. Some cookbook authors will be their own food stylist. That is not my journey. That's not what I'm good at. The thought of taking 2 weeks off of work, like brand partnerships, the newsletter, everything, to style my own cookbook, like didn't make sense financially. It actually made more sense to hire someone. So for a ton of reasons, I hired someone to food style. And I really was like sitting there at a table while they were all working, and then they'd be like, "Does this look good?" And I'd be like, "Yep." And they'd be like, "Was this cilantro? Is this cilantro chopped small enough?" And I'd be like, "Yep." And I'm just kind of like the client. It's
Perfect.
fun. It's really fun. My crew was so fun. It was a blast.
It's kind of neat because this thing you've created now is in
Yeah.
someone else's hands, and like it's a
Yes.
collaboration
Yeah.
of creativity.
Totally. And they're like, "Oh, this is delicious." And you're like, "Thank you." I thought so too. So yeah, that's a really fun process. So you're finishing edits, you're finishing photography, like kind of concurrently, and then you get to take like a little chill pill while the designer gets to work. So the cookbook design is a huge process too, right? So you're getting concepts and they're like, "Do you like this, or this?" And I'm like, "You're like this." And they're like, "Okay, do you like this, or this?" You're like that. And so there's like some design stuff that goes on. Some cookbook authors are like crazy involved in this. They're mocking up their own pages. They're doing it themselves. I really trust the Union Square designers. And I was like, "You guys are killing it. You're doing a great job. Go forth." So I made my this or that decisions, but like a lot of people will hire their own cookbook designers. That is again not my journey. And so you're doing that design, but you're like done writing for a moment. And so you take a breath and you're just working on the fun stuff and like making it look beautiful, picking the cover, all of that kind of thing. And and then marketing, and then you got to push it. That part. I'm sure that part's the same. Months beforehand, we started working with a PR firm, I think 4 months before launch, um, lining up press, lining up the cookbook tour. I'm doing an 18 city tour. So lining all of that up is a huge thing. I wanted like a party in each city basically. And I very quickly realized that I was trying to produce a like wedding in 18 cities and like that wasn't a possibility. So I'm touring with Williams Sonoma and Barnes and Noble, and they know exactly how to do all of this and it'll be great. I'm doing a few like author speaker events. One tonight This is August 13th, one tonight at Barnes & Noble Union Square with Sola El-Wayley, who's an awesome cookbook author. Party in Brooklyn tomorrow. So lots of different types of events. And so now it's kind of like the fruits of the labor. Like I get to go
Yeah.
out and meet all these people who have been so supportive of the newsletter and the book. And it feels really exciting to be where I am now.
That's amazing. I'm so excited for you. Will you be cooking, doing any demos at any of these events?
No demos. That was a piece of advice given to me by my friend Gabi, actually, who's like a 5-time New York Times best-selling cookbook author. She was like, you're going to be exhausted. You're traveling. Like, I'm doing a different city every day. She's like, you're going to be exhausted. Like, who's going to set up the food? Who's going to... She was like, just don't. Like, they see you on Instagram cooking in your own kitchen with your proper tools, like, every single day. A demo isn't it. Like, just show up and chat and mingle. Like, that's much more fun. So
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I've done the tour where you're in a different city every day. You start to forget what city you're in. And the events
yes.
go late, and then you get a little bit of
Yes.
sleep, and then you have to get up early and you're on a plane again for the
Yes.
entire day. Your flights are delayed. I mean, hopefully all of your flights go smoothly.
I know.
But
I said that to my team. I was like, wait, if there's one flight delay, like the house of cards crumbles down. And they were like, yeah.
It's a
Okay.
very stressful time for your publicist.
Yes, I would think so. Yeah.
Well,
It's going to be great.
I'm thrilled for you. If there is, tell everyone what, let's see, the one thing you hope they take away from the cookbook.
From the book, that cooking doesn't have to be that hard or that serious. This cookbook, I'm in my office and my shelves are lined with cookbooks that I love and draw inspiration from. And I would say the big difference of my book is that we are like, cook it for 10 minutes if you want it this way, or 12 minutes if you want it that way. Either way, it's going to be delicious. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I use very colloquial language. I never use words like sear or braise unless they're also qualified by telling you what the hell that means. This is a cookbook for both really novice cooks who just like don't feel confident in the kitchen, and people who do feel really confident but are sick of like having to hunt for recipes, and like they take twice as long as they say they're going to. It's a really fun, happy, like lighthearted cookbook full of really delicious food.
I love that. And I can tell because it is you, it's your personality, like truly shining through your writing and your recipes. So thank you so much for being on the show. Where can everyone find you online, and where can they find your tour schedule?
I'm Caro Chambers online, and you can find my tour schedule on Instagram. My newsletter is whattocook.substack.com, and you can find my tour schedule at carolinechambers.com, and there's a tab at the top that says book tour.
Amazing. We'll have such a great time. Congratulations once again.
Thank
and
you.
Everyone, make sure you go out and get What to Cook When You Don't Feel Like Cooking, which is the most perfect title ever.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.